Hello.
Hello. Hey,
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
I'm very happy to hear that. I just opened your text, so I think we're just gonna go through it, right? Let's use our time as best we can.
Sweet,
Um,
sweet.
so we only have 30 minutes, so I'm here to ask the big questions. My wing condition, course correction. Okay, we'll get back into that when we're at the bottom. I want all these things listed at the bottom. Oh, okay, we'll get into it now then. I want better practice. I want to do what is required to get better. I want to have a more efficient system of improvements. I want to figure out exactly what's holding me back, what I need to face. I want you to make sure I'm equipped to deconstruct problems more effectively. I want to connect to the improvement community. I want to connect to players that will show me what I need to improve. I want more. Okay, well, sure. I want more people to bounce ideas off of, and I want you to ask me quick fire questions. Make sure I'm doing everything I can. Okay. Um,
Um,
Go
do
ahead.
you want editing access to the document?
Don't worry about it. Don't worry. I just when I see the squiggly lines, I just click on it out of out of habit. Don't worry
Yeah,
about it.
right, right,
Um,
right, right.
I want all these things listed at the bottom. I want one solid lead for each of them, and with as much time as we have, I want to dive deeply into as much as possible. My inspiration, the golden age of childhood, conditioning getting real, self-doubt and misery, philosophy, competition, and taking responsibility. And now we're heading into okay, I see. We can get into this if we have the time.
Yeah.
But for now, this just gives me a general timeline. You were Super Mario World, Mario Kart, Super Mario Maker, chess, and then Ultimate. That's awesome. What's your chess rating?
Uh, I think my highest rating on chess.com was about 1200, but when I went to chess tournaments in person, I never got much higher than 800 because like I just got so discouraged by how much the players there were dominating me.
That makes sense. No, that's fair. Chess tournaments are fucking different, dude. I remember when I was
They
like 12, I went to my first chess tournament, and I was just sitting there like, what do I do?
Yeah,
But yeah,
it's very scary.
I get it. What's up with HBox?
Hungrybox, like I saw Implement's video. I'm sure you've seen it before.
Uh-huh.
He made this documentary about HBox's Smash career, and like it was just so inspiring to me that someone like HBox, like he didn't seem that talented as an individual. He didn't seem like super privileged or anything. Like obviously he came from a very not a very, but like his environment that he grew up in was not exceptional, and to me that was a very life changing idea that somebody could just put in work and get good.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, like there's a lot of ideas in my childhood that I learned that like told me I would never be good enough. Even though like I believe the opposite now, like there's a lot more that I could do to improve. I have a lot of documentation of my improvement, and I just want to see where I should go from here.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. How year one century go? Good. Cool. Okay. Set of VODs, locals journaling, the Death Note. Jesus Christ. Is that the people you want to beat?
No, that's so I have a journal that I take to me to every tournament, and like whenever I'm just like bored or I'm thinking about something that frustrates me, I'll write about it.
Uh huh.
And this one player in the New Mexico Smash community, when I was visiting there, they called it the Death Note, which I thought was really funny. So
That's
I'm
funny.
gonna keep that name with me.
I like that. Okay. Earned improvement practice daily, improvement performance, sacrificing for skills. Homeless people from Arby's? Why are you sacrificing homeless people from Arby's for your skills? What the heck? What did
Hey,
they
I
do?
mean, somebody's got to take the blow.
Jesus Christ. Okay. Um, I saw that I solidify ideas as fact too fast. You think you're ahead of the curve in information that you haven't tested in tournament environment. You're still focusing too much on tactical execution instead of decision making. Sometimes your cockiness in play bleeds into moments where if you played safer, if you played without regard for smurfing, you would have won. The meta is an ever shifting idea. A lot of it is based on intuition and feeling. By simplifying it into spreadsheets and grinding instead of studying and engaging with the game, with others, you're limiting yourself into what's possible outside of your exploration. And again, both of our mindsets have equal counterparts in competitive.
Um, this was a note from my friend who
Mm,
takes a lot more inspiration from Mango, which like
I
obviously you
see.
can see the correlation with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thesis. To become a more successful and adaptive competitive player, one must challenge the tendency to prematurely solidify ideas. focus excessively on technical execution over decision making, and allow overconfidence to negatively impact gameplay. Additionally, it's essential to recognize the dynamic nature of the meta and avoid limiting oneself to solely relying on spreadsheets and solo grinding. 3 main changes are needed. Testing. Testing should be in serious matches. Balance technical execution and decision making. Makes sense. And embrace the dynamic nature. Okay. Both mindsets have merits. My vision for the meta: trapper playstyles are underrated. I am trapper brained. That's good. I am the opposite of trapper brained.
Awesome. I love to hear that.
Exactly. So I'm sure we're gonna find some sort of middle ground. Steve isn't that
Cool.
good. Okay, on that we can agree. Ultimate can become a high reissue game. I agree as well. I can become a top player. I agree 100%. Ultimate can be a fun game for newcomers to be serious about. Always has been. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that stand out to me, okay? Let me think, because I'm gonna have to present this in a way that makes sense.
Take your time, by all means.
So I think the one thing that I'm really noticing in your thought process is that you're trying to make everything as objective as possible. I'm sure you would agree
Yes,
with that.
I agree with that.
And so this is something that I'm always very keen on, because I used to be the same way back when I was
Mhm.
16, 17, starting off with Brawl. As a
Yeah,
when the Earth was still
right.
young.
I I loved your video on competition. That was one of my favorite videos I've ever seen.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Um, Something that I really recall from that period is that I was the same, where I tried to make everything super objective, and I would look like, for example, someone would like spot dodge on a platform, and I would be like, there's never a reason to spot dodge on a platform. And I think the thing that has really helped me elevate um my mindset from then to now is accepting how contextual things are in Smash. And especially a game like Smash, which has a lot of different contexts. And if we compare it to like the list of games that you've been through, right? Um these are all like very complex games, right? Like Mario Kart with like 8 people racing. I don't know which version you played, but I know Mario Kart for the
Uh,
Wii was complex enough.
it was Mario Kart DS at first. I played that
Okay,
with my brother, and then I switched to Mario Kart 8. But I mostly played by myself, just with CPUs. I played some online.
fair enough. Fair enough.
But I really tried to like get used to the system mechanics.
Yeah, no, I get you. And then like chess, obviously, like a complex game, right? Like people
Yeah,
have devoted their life to studying it. But if you look at Ultimate, I would argue Ultimate is magnitudes more complex than chess is. Why? Because there's just more factors to keep in
yeah,
mind, right? Like there's your
I completely agree with you there.
yeah, so there's your timer, your percentage, your stage control, the distance to the opponent, your prior information, the matchup, blah blah blah. And so when
Something
I
that
go ahead.
something that like took me a long time to get over when I switched from chess to ultimate is that there aren't turns anymore. Like you have
Hmm.
it's very much a different dynamic to be playing with another player at the same time, because not only are there like it's not just rock paper scissors, but like ultimate is very much a movement game. So like with it being a platform fighter, like even though like this option beats this option, if they do it at a slightly different timing, or if they just outspace you, or like there's some weird hurtbox interaction, they'll just win sometimes, or you'll just win sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's weird to like combine. Like it doesn't. It's not as structured as chess is by any means.
That's a
Well,
good
well,
way to put it.
yeah, that's what I think.
So when I look at the thing you write down, I feel like in your effort to make everything concrete, you're kind of you're paying in terms of how contextual your information can be, right? So when I think about how to conceptualize what's happening in the game, I think there's like a skill, right? And the skill goes from basically like granular to generic. And so if something is too generic, then it's not very actionable. For example, saying
Right.
in disadvantage, we should reset to neutral, that's so generic, I would not call that good advice. I think if you say, like, oh, generally, it is better to focus on resetting to neutral rather than focusing on hitting your opponent when you're at a disadvantage, I would say yes. But if you say in disadvantage, you reset to neutral, I would say that would be too generic, right? On the other hand, you have too granular, where you say, well, in disadvantage, you can jump and air dodge this way, and you have 360 degrees of air dodge directions, and then you have this option, and you can delay it by 1 frame or by 2, right? And then it's like, it's not actionable either. So there's some sort of happy middle ground where we take in enough of the granular factors, right? This, in other words, is how many variables you take in, while keeping it generic so that it's applicable and usable for the human brain. And this is basically the actionability region, right?
I'm sorry, I don't. Oh, you're streaming. I'm sorry, I'm not looking
Oh,
at that.
I am so sorry. I should let you know. Yes, I am streaming. Hey, come join me. Are you in?
Um, I don't understand what you drew,
Okay.
but
No, no, no.
if
I'll help you. So we're gonna erase. So what I was saying. No, don't worry. It's good that you say this because I want you to be on the same page. So what I was saying is like, and when you're conceptualizing what's going on, it's always on a scale, right? And the scale is from granular to generic.
yeah,
And so I was saying, right, if things are too generic, then it's not really applicable because you're not factoring in the things that make the decision make sense, right? So when you say, oh, in disadvantage, you're reset to neutral, I would call that bad advice, blah, 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 what I was saying, right? When we're too granular, there's too many details for us to make a good decision, right? Like a brain cannot handle like I said, like, oh, you can nair here or nair 1 frame later or 2 frame later or 3 frame later. It doesn't really work. So what we need to find is we need to find like a happy middle ground where we're generic enough that it's applicable, but also granular enough that we're factoring the most important variables that make a choice successful, right? And
okay,
when
yeah,
I
I
look
see
at
your point.
a lot of what you write down, I feel like you're very happy to be like anywhere on the scale. And I think like the biggest thing you can do for your own sake is to start looking for this middle ground. So I'll give you an example. Right here, we're looking at disadvantage, reset to neutral. I think this is fine advice if you bring it in the terms of in disadvantage. The most consistent thing that you can do is reset to neutral. But I would actually say, like, if I were to coach someone and I want them to be as successful as quickly as possible, I would say in disadvantage, look to reset look to reversal the shit out of your opponent. Why would I say that? Because it's the most rewarding, right? And only when they
Yeah,
show you that they're stopping a reversal, only then should you go for the lower reward option, which is resetting to neutral. So while resetting to neutral is like the most consistent option, I don't think it's necessarily the best because in Smash, the best risk reward is not always the best option because Smash at the end of the day comes down to RPS systems, right? So knowing what your
that's
opponent is going to
very,
do, that's going to help you win interactions.
that's very interesting because I've always assumed like it's just always bad. Like I have snake forward air, right? So I'm very tempted to reversal
Uh
people,
huh.
uh, and like that move is slow, as many people know. It's
Mm-hmm.
the slowest aerial in the game, and so like sometimes I'll hit people with it, but whenever I do, I just like shake my head inside, and I'm like, damn, that should not have worked. Um, but it makes sense. Like I need to take advantage of those opportunities. If people are edge guarding me at a certain angle, like I need to show them that they're not allowed to do that when they're in my space.
Exactly.
So that's yeah,
And that's the thing, right? And that's why I bring this up is because like I think your theory makes sense. Like you should research. I think this is the correct option. You found the correct option, but what is correct and what works isn't always the same. And so when we look at what your friend said, who's more like a mango type player, as you call it, which I like. I used to talk about the Armada mango spectrum,
yeah,
which is kind of
yes,
what we're
yeah,
looking at right now, right?
right.
Um, so the way I think about it, right, is that, like you said, they both have merits. But at the end of the day, if you look at Armada, he was very intuitive. It's just that his intuition was polished with theory. And if you look at Mango nowadays, he's actually gotten more theoretical himself. If you compare Mango like post Slippy to pre Slippy, it's an entirely different beast. And then again, what we kind of get to is that there's like a happy medium. So it shouldn't be like, oh, I can be either intuitive or more theoretical. No, I think we should have theory to inform our intuition. But in the end of the day, at the end of the day, if we're in the game, right, and you're playing like 10 seconds of gameplay, how many choices do you think there are in 10 seconds of gameplay? I think we can easily reach like 100 plus choices, right? If we like
Yeah, I
really
agree.
break it down. You cannot
Uh-huh.
make those choices deliberately. You have to rely on your intuition.
Okay, I
So,
understand.
yeah. So that's something that I think is like really prevalent in how you think about the game, is that it's very binary, right? It's like, oh, this is correct, this is incorrect, or like, oh, this is the way you do it. So here's another thing, right? So the neutral triangle. I think this is a fine video, by the way. But overshooting beats reacting, poking beats overshooting, reacting beats poking. I get the perspective, but I can list so many moves that don't follow this trend.
Yeah, like it's a it's a good general rule, but obviously there is exceptions because it's a platform fighter.
Exactly. And so what we kind of get to is once we start understanding the rules, it's no longer about the rules because those are assumed true. When we understand the rules, what is most interesting is when do the rules not hold up? So I'll give you an example, right? Like, okay, this is the normal dynamic you play, and then you play against, I don't know, Samus who has charge shot, which is just like outside of this realm of neutral triangle entirely. And that's where you're
Yeah,
gonna really learn about the game, because now you cannot rely on just like these solid rules, but you have to understand like why are these rules true? Why is it true that overshooting beats reacting? Why is it true that poking beats? You see what I mean? And so it's kind of like an exception proves the rule kind of deal. Let me give you an example of the other side of your perspective. So if we scroll down, this is something that really stood out to me. Snake specific stuff. I totally get all this stuff, right? Like I think this makes sense. I didn't read everything, of course, but like, these are your grenade confirms. These are your, down air dash tag, blah blah. I get this. But like writing this down, it doesn't actually do anything for you. Why?
I
Because
just
I'm gonna explain. You know why? Because when you hit your falling near one, it's not like you're gonna sit down and think, okay, should I jab 1 2 3 4 tilt 1 2, or do like jab 1 and 2? You don't have time to think about it. You literally don't have time to
oh
think about it. And that's the thing. Is
yeah,
like these are
but
things that should be intuitive. And I understand that if you write it down, you get a better idea of everything that you can do. Like I get that. I totally
right.
get that.
Uh-huh.
But the point is, if I were to ask you, hey, dude, you have 30 minutes to make as much improvement as possible. If you spend that writing all of this down, I would say, bro, you're wasting your fucking time. I would rather have you spend 30 minutes watching Apollo Kage VODs and just figuring
Right.
out how he solves like some problems that you struggle with. You see what I mean? So
Mhm.
like I'm not saying this is
Yeah.
bad. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying this is bad. What I'm saying is that this is an indication of what you value. And again, this is very concrete and very theoretical. But in practice, right? Like let me tell you this. How often have you hit falling fair instant double jump up air? I
Probably
hope.
like three
Okay.
times.
Ever. You know what I mean? And so, like,
Right.
again, like, I'm not saying you shouldn't do this. I'm saying, like, the fact that this is a thing that you care this much about shows me that your focus here, this is very granular, right? So we're kind of going back to this idea where if you're too granular, it's stuff that your brain cannot really keep up with. And I totally get that, like, you want to know all of this so that you can work it into your intuition and make it like
Hmm.
more generic. But I promise
Yeah.
you right now, working falling fair into instant double jump upper into your intuition, it's just useless. It is literally
I,
just like not worth the time to work it into your intuition, because your intuition can only hold so many things and you've only have so much time to like build it, right? And
yeah.
so the effort you put into stuff like that, it's just a little bit disproportionate. I'm not saying bad, I'm saying disproportionate.
I see your point now.
And the same goes for this, right? Like all this stuff, I get it. I totally get it. And I think like, okay, these are my CQC options. Having this ready, totally get it. But what I would love to see before we dive into the actual options you have in CQC is like what are the ideas that we have in CQC? Like generally, what are we trying to accomplish? So when you're in CQC, I think in general there are two things you want to do: either you fight or you run. Right, and against characters where, like let's say Sephiroth, you fight. Against characters like let's say Ryu, you run. Like kind of like that, right? And then you can make more like asterisks. You can say, well, if I'm entering Ryu with pressure, like he shields a grenade and then I get to pressure shield, then I don't run, right? And but like thinking about the game in those ways is going to be way more important, because now we're like, okay, this is the granularity, right? And this is the generic nature of it. And like here we're like in this area. But if I say, okay, in close quarters, you either fight or run, that's way too generic. So what we need like this middle ground where like, okay, instead of thinking about these options in general, we can kind of categorize and say, okay, these are ways to fight. these are ways to disengage, or we can even say these are ways to anti-air, these are ways to fight on the ground, or we can say these are ways to bait, these are ways to attack, right? And what we're doing then is we're saying, okay, well, it's a bit more generic, but it's still granular enough for us to get the reward of out of making that distinction, making that choice. And again, I want to stress, I don't think this is bad at all. I just think like
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
need to move towards this middle ground where it's both
See.
generic enough that we can make that choice in on intuition accurately, as well as being granular enough that the choice actually leads to significant results over not making that choice. You see what I mean?
I see what you mean. I understand like a lot of what makes my gameplay so inconsistent is that just like a lot of my ideas are like they how do I say this? A lot of my ideas come from the same place, but because
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like specifically trying to be intuitive about things or specifically trying to be granular about things as you say, like there's just a lot of scattered points where
Exactly.
I'm tipped one way or the other depending on my influences at the moment.
Yeah, and what that kind of comes down to is this distinction that you make between like your, I'm gonna call it deliberate, right, and deliberate play and
Yeah.
intuition based
Uh-huh.
play. And so what I think is like we need to stop making that distinction. That's like our step one. So our step one is to get rid of the distinction between deliberate and intuitive play. And what we need to do is we need to marry these concepts. And how we do that is generally what we do is we start off deliberate until something becomes intuitive. So for example, I'll give you a very like micro example, right? Like if Joker dash attacks our shield, we should shield drop up tilt. Very clear punish, right? But
Yeah.
if it's not part of your intuition and you have to think about it, you're going to be too late. So what we do is we start off trying to do this deliberately, and then over time we train our brain to get used to the situation and our desired output, and then over time it becomes instinctual. This is something that is known as the 4 stages of mastery. Have you ever heard of that before?
I've never heard about that. Please tell me more.
So the 4 stages of mastery are basically the 4 phases that your brain goes through as you get good at something. So step one is unconscious incompetence. Step two is conscious incompetence. Then we get to conscious competence, and then we get to unconscious competence. So as you can
Okay.
see, we go from we don't know anything about this and we suck at it to we know we suck at it, and then okay, if we do it deliberately we can do it, and then eventually we can do it intuitively. So we kind of like what this is basically, this is deliberate play, and this is instinctual play, and these first two are just like you sucking ass. But our goal is to make these steps. So these steps are very simple. First, we need to, right, this is realization. We need to know that we have a problem. So we go from unconscious to being conscious about it. Then we need to, basically, we need to deliberately practice, which is what we just talked about, right?
Huh?
We try to deliberately do it. And then
Yeah.
we repeat until it becomes intuitive, and that's the grind part. So if you think about someone like Light, I don't think Light has a very strong intuitive, or sorry, let me rephrase that. I don't think Light has a very strong theoretical understanding of the game, but
Okay.
because he has these concepts so grinded out and so much part of his instinctual play, that even though he doesn't have that theoretical basis to rely on, the things he does are so instinctual that he just outplays people on an athletic level, right? Just like through sheer technical inputs and speed, he's gonna beat you. And I've seen a lot of people who know more about the game lose to Light because they're not as fast as he is, because it like, and that's the thing again, like take 10 seconds of gameplay, we're like 100 plus interactions in, right? And so if
Yeah.
you make, let's say you make an average of 60 interactions per second, which is about average for a mid-level player, 60 per second.
Okay.
Or sorry, 60 per minute. I'm sorry, 60 per minute. So 60 BPM, right? So if you think about it in terms of a song, it's like 60 BPM. So that's about average for a mid-level player. Now, Light is closer to like 100, 120-ish. So he's literally making two decisions for every decision you're making because they're so freaking instinctual. And they're so polished as well, right? So they're not just like instinct, they're like on a whole nother level of instinct. So you can be instinctual about like grenade stuff, but as soon as someone breaks out of your expected patterns, you're going to slow the fuck down. Why? Because you're no longer in your comfort zone. There is no slowing down for Light. So, as you can see, if you play against Light, it doesn't matter if you know more about the game. He's going to make two choices for every one choice you make. You're going to get blown up. That's just like, it's just kind of like logical, right? Because if he's doing two things per thing that you're doing, you're not keeping up. He's hitting you before literally before you even realize it. And if you look at Light in pools, God knows he hits people a lot before they realize it. So, that is kind of like our first step, is like if we need to break this distinction. And then the second thing that we need to do, like we discussed, is we need to start finding the middle ground between granular and generic, right? So I'm sorry for the noise. That's loud. Jesus
Don't worry.
Christ, what was he doing? Anyway, so too generic is not basically is you're making subpar choices, right? Like disengage and disadvantage. Okay, well, true most of the time, but like we need to make more choices than that. And too granular, and like we cannot keep up mentally. So we need to find a balance where we're making choices that significantly impact the quality of our decisions. So, in other words, a factor like percent is high quality impact, whereas a factor like the timer is a low quality impact, right? Like if we say, oh, we need to keep the timer in mind more, that's almost never going to actually make us make a better decision. But if we say we need to keep the percentage in mind more, that's almost always going to make us make a better decision, right? And that is what we essentially want to get to. So I have this video, and I recommend you watch it because,
Right.
I don't have infinite time. So it's like my video on MK I have a lot of videos on MK Here, this one. The one difference between you and MK I fucking love this video. I love the thumbnail too. He's very happy blocking your strike. So in this video, I talk about what is the difference between a good and a bad player. And the way I describe it is that it essentially comes down to how many things you're factoring into your choices. Okay, so in your case, either we're not factoring in enough, we're too generic, or we're factoring so much that we cannot actually get to a decision, and that is what we need to fix. And so I recommend you watch the video. I think is very enlightening in terms of what goes into making a good decision. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think those are the main things. I can give you some quick feedback on these specific things if you would like me to before we end today's
Yeah.
session.
Please. As
Okay.
much as you can. I also made an arena I'd like to play a little bit before we go, but if that's not a thing that we can do, I understand.
I do have another session lined up like immediately, so I'll give you feedback on this and then we're going to have to call it. But if you want to play games, I do recommend like just getting another session and we can run them for sure.
Awesome.
I would just prefer to give you feedback on these things since it sounds like you're really waiting
Yeah.
for that. So,
More with her.
I want to do what's required to get better. I want to have a more efficient system of improvements. Right. So, like, I don't know what your current system is, but what I
Can tell you.
cannot, well, you can tell me. I think we're gonna run out of time. But what I can give you is I can give you a bit of pointers of where you want to be in terms of efficiency for improvement. Okay. So,
Okay.
generally, what I recommend is a cycle of basically new ideas and then testing and then reflecting until eventually, which eventually leads into implementation. So as you said yourself, like you might solidify your ideas too quickly. Generally what I would say is don't grind the game unless you have like ideas to implement or there's like stuff that you specifically want to polish, right? So let's say I have my first major next week. I'm going to try to focus more on polishing. Totally fair with me. But if your goal is to improve, you always want to work from a new idea. So a new idea could be a new grenade pattern, but it can also be, hey, when I'm in the corner, what if I focus more on getting the roll in off? That is like, it sounds like a very like simple idea, but like just that perspective is going to change how you play the corner entirely. So new idea, you go into the game, you test it, you reflect on it, and then you try to implement when you're at a point where, you know, like you feel like it is the quote unquote final form. This is basically, this is just this is like, I call it scientific method, I think. So in
Hmm.
other words, it's like hypotheses, which leads to a test, which gathers feedback, and then you adjust hypotheses, and then you test, and then you get feedback until you find a conclusion. So that also is going to probably help you deconstruct problems more effectively. What I would say the biggest thing you want to keep in mind is win conditions. So in other words, try to make your actions work towards a goal, which is in this case a win condition, or avoiding your opponent's goal, right? So when you're deconstructing problems, try to not look at them in too isolated of a light. Try to place them in proper context. In other words, what are we working towards? So sometimes that can be, well, I just want to hit them. Well, in that case, you got to ask yourself, well, how do we reach that win condition? How do we get there? You see what I mean?
Hmm.
In terms of connecting
Yeah.
to players, that will show you what I need to improve. I'm gonna burst your bubble here. There's no one who will show you what you need to improve. Why? Because, well, you've already been shown what you need to improve. You're just not ready to see it yet.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it sounds very cryptic, doesn't it? Let me quickly tell my students that I'll be like 5 minutes late. Hey, Paige, finishing my current session. 55. Okay, let's finish. So here's the thing, right? The information that you need already exists. If you look at Leo and I were to tell you what to look at, like for example, look at how Leo corner pressures, and then you're like, okay, I don't really see it, and then if I explain it, you would be able to see it, right? In other
Hmm.
words, that information, it already exists. You just cannot see it yet. You cannot parse that information yet. And so the way I
Okay.
think about it, right, is that like, let's say like this is the scale of skill, where this is like 0 skill, and it's like 100 skill, and let's say you're at like 50. You can generally interpret what's going on within this range, but if people play, well, not backwards, even though to some degree it is, but mostly forwards, let's just ignore the backwards part. But if people are in this area, you just like don't really understand the context necessary to really
Yeah.
parse what's happening, and that's normal.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
no one is going to show you what you need to improve. It's going to be up to you to be able to see it. You see what I mean? You cannot kind of like, um you cannot outsource
There's no
that to
right.
someone else. So what you should focus on is not finding someone who shows you what you need to see. What you should focus on is trying to see what you can. Okay? So try to pull this process inwards rather than outsourcing it.
Okay.
Wanting more people to bounce ideas off, I can help you with that. I'm sure. Are you in my server? You are,
I
right?
am in your.
All right. Well,
Yes.
feel free to talk in there. A lot of people are very willing to discuss the game, so um, I'm sure it will be a good resource for you.
Awesome.
And with that, that was a intense 30 minutes, wasn't it?
That was a banger session, dude. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm happy to hear that. You gave me really, really good information to work with. I'm gonna move on because my session should have started like 5 minutes ago. So, final things. I'll send
Hmm.
you the notes for today. I'll also send you a VOD with just of our session. I'll upload it after my next session, so in like an hour and a half or so. Um, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send them to me in our Discord DMs. But if you do have like new questions or like topics that require a little bit more effort, I do recommend getting a new session. Okay?
Okay. I will get a new session with you. I think
All right.
but I'm very happy with the information you've given me.
I'm very happy to hear that. Thank you so much for the support, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Keep up the good work, man. Love your content, and I'll see you later.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great one. Talk
Bye.
to you later. Bye bye.